Hi guys, welcome back to Golden Reviewer. So these two devices are both Galaxy S21 Ultra, but they are of different variants. As you can see here, the one on the left is Snapdragon 888, okay, and the one on the right is the Exynos 2100, okay. So they are supposedly very similar or the same device in that sense, but we all know that they actually perform differently. But now the device has been released for more than 3 months, I think, and both of them receive a few updates that supposedly should improve performance and so on, right? So as you can see here, both of these two devices are just updated to May security patch, right? So it's the latest firmware, and many of you want me to test the Genshin Impact game to see whether there is still a big difference between these two devices. We all know that the Snapdragon usually performs a little bit better, while the Exynos lags behind a bit. So we are all curious whether Samsung has improved that with updates and if they've closed the gap, okay? So let's go and test it out. Okay, so before I actually start a test, I want to show you that I have these game plugins, and I've set both of them to max FPS, which should give the best performance at the expense of a little bit higher power consumption, right? Because we want smooth gameplay, and we don't really care about power or heat or anything. We just want them to perform their best. That's why we set it to max FPS. Okay, now let's launch the game and check the graphics settings. We make sure that both devices are running the game at max graphics settings plus 60 FPS, so the test is fair to both devices. Okay, so next I'll show you the 10 minutes gameplay footage as well as real-time FPS and power, okay, from both of these devices. But before we start, I have something to clarify. Some of you might have noticed that the FPS shown on the floating widget is actually different from the FPS shown by my prof dog. The Samsung game plugin actually shows 50 to 60 FPS most of the time. But this is because Samsung did something very interesting. They add InterFrame, especially for this game. So the device actually doesn't have to render the game at 60 FPS. For example, it renders at 40, but Samsung add another 20 interframes by some software algorithm, and it shows you 40 plus 20, which is 60 FPS. This is somewhat legit. I actually covered this in a previous video. There is indeed a way to disable this, but I guess most of the users or players will not disable this. They'll just play the game with default settings like how Samsung intends them to do, right? And I think this is because Samsung also realizes that so far there's no SoC on any smartphone that can run Genshin Impact game at stable 60 FPS. Unless you have some crazy cooling method like the Legend 2 Pro device or something like that. So instead of allow the FPS to go all the way up to 60 for 1 or 2 minutes and then the device throttle down and giving the user a very bad experience, I think they somehow devised this strategy to actually do interframe. So your device will actually run the game max as 40 FPS, but it will be able to maintain a more stable frame rate. And because of the interframes, this 40 FPS is actually more smoother than the 40 FPS on, say, an iPhone 12 Pro Max after throttling. So I think it's some effort done by Samsung here. I used to think it's a scam, but now I actually somewhat appreciate this strategy, okay? So we'll leave the interframe function turned on, right? We will not disable it, but we'll actually record the real FPS because that number tells you the true performance, right? Not the number after you add in the interframes, because that is just a bloated number and doesn't really make sense. Okay, so this is just to solve your doubt, because some of you might ask why on the phone itself it shows 60 but you tell me it's 40. It doesn't make sense, right? but this is the reason behind. Okay, now I will actually stop talking and let you enjoy the 10 minutes gameplay. But of course, if you are not interested, fast forward to the end to check the result. Oh, also, can I ask you to give me a thumb up and share it to your friends? And also remember to subscribe my channel if you haven't. Okay, now without further ado, let's go.
Access denied. 天理长驱。Solidify.收并蓄，该走攻击了。Stabilize。拒收并蓄，收起来吧。拒收并蓄。Adventure time. 双寒化生。Off we go. Adventure time. Gather. Solidify. Next on the agenda. Schedule. Next on the agenda. We're way behind schedule.
Okay, results are in. We've played the game for 10 minutes, and let's see the FPS performance. Okay, so the result might disappoint some of you, but I have to say that the Exynos have not improved much from these updates. The Snapdragon 888 variant performs okay at an average 38.5 FPS, but remember the interframe thing I told you, Samsung will actually add another 20 or so interframes, so it's actually maintaining so-called 60 FPS throughout the gameplay. The FPS is actually quite stable after the interframes, and I'll say the gameplay is quite enjoyable. It's of course not as smooth as a 60 FPS, as a real 60 FPS, right? But I think for most people, it's quite enjoyable, and the heat is not that much. If you really try to run the game at 60, I think your hands are going to suffer because the device will become very hot, and your battery will also drain faster. So this performance on the Snapdragon variant, I think is acceptable. Samsung device different way of running this game at a playable performance level, okay? And I think that is actually quite legit. But, right, on the Exynos variant, even with the interframes added in, the performance is not good. And I'll say I can definitely feel some lags here and there, because if you see the average FPS is only less than 30, so no interframe technology is going to make that smooth at all, right? Even in the later part of the game, we even see something like 20 FPS or 25, so there is no way to make this a smooth gameplay. And then for power consumption, overall they are actually quite similar. Both of them consume about 5 watts of power. The Snapdragon 888 is a little bit higher at 5.2 watts, but I think the difference is quite small. So maybe Samsung set the standard for power consumption here, and they basically just limit the device to only consume around 5 watts of power. And with that power envelope, the Exynos can only achieve 30 FPS, while the Snapdragon can achieve 40 FPS. So in conclusion, if you are an avid Genshin Impact player and you are buying your smartphone to play Genshin Impact as one of the main usage, then you should really think twice before buying an Exynos 2100 device. I'm not against Exynos in any way, because this year it actually improves a lot, and in many other games the performance is comparable or even better than Snapdragon. But I don't know why, just in this Genshin Impact, in this one game, the Exynos performs very, very badly. It's not about the Mali GPU actually, because we know the Kirin processors performs quite well, right? Even the MediaTek processors, they all use Mali GPU and they perform okay or quite well. But Exynos really struggles in this game, and I have no idea why. I really hope Samsung can come out and answer us why Exynos 2100 is so bad at this game, or even better, if they can really fix this performance with a future update, then I'm happy. Alright guys, so that's all for today's video. Hope you enjoyed the content, and see you next time.